My name is Ray O'Fowlu. I work for a charity based in Ennisdiamond called Home Tree. We have two other speakers. Manus Crowley is a registered forester, does a lot of work around County Clare, does a whole suite of forestry from native to coniferous to close to nature to continuous cover forestry. I'm sure you'll probably speak about that a little bit. And Jonathan Spatsy is with Teagasc. He's a forestry advisor, so gives farmers objective information about what might work for their farm and their system. I suppose what I wanted to maybe talk about very briefly is the opportunities. I really appreciate that it's not a small undertaking for a landowner to get into forestry. Particularly, it hasn't been the easiest couple of years recently with problems with licensing and whatever, but notwithstanding that, I do still think there's benefits to trees of all different sorts on farms, and I'm really going to fly through these, but certainly there's benefits to systems. I know there's a couple of people in the room into agroforestry, that's trees integrated with livestock, and there's huge benefits there around shelter or diversifying forage for livestock. There's also regulatory compliance. You know, derogation and whatnot isn't so much a big issue here in West Clare, but water quality is an issue. You know, we've had a lot of beach closures and ensuring that we're not allowing excessive nutrients flowing into our rivers and waterways. There is a role for forestry there as an interceptor or a buffer. I think like one of the bigger challenges for farming at this point in time is public perception. You know, the amount of people involved in farming is getting less and less, and you know, it seems to be getting the blame for a huge amount of environmental issues. And I think trees, or integrating trees, particularly native trees or close to nature coniferous forestry systems, really has something positive to offer the public image of farming. This image behind us is from a local farmer here, Noel Curtin, and it was taken on his farm as part of an EIP, and it was a European innovation project about integrating trees into farmlands in this area. And we worked with 12 farmers, and they all applied for, they all did a small-scale woodland creation project of around 3,000 trees, and went into a large-scale project of around, well, anything from 3 to 20,000 trees. And one of the big things I learned or found out from this project is one of the big things farmers get from trees is just from forestry is just a love of nature and a love of growing trees and improving habitats on their farm. I really think it's a huge benefit. Finally, like there was a new scheme launched last November, a new government program of forestry. So everything from your small-scale woodlands to large-scale coniferous and native woodlands, and there's massively increased premiums go along with them. I think they're a 40% increase. So anything from native woodlands at around €1,150 per hectare per year for 20 years to the native tree area scheme, which is up to €2,200 per hectare per year for 10 years. The lads will get into a lot more detail on these schemes here tonight. So there's a real argument to be made for kind of farm income diversification through forestry, and it's not the old type of forestry where the forestry comes in and the farming goes out. It's really how forestry can be put or brought into your farm system whilst continuing to farm. The last thing, and it's the last thing I'll say, is about legacy. I hear it from farmers all the time, is that, you know, a lot of farmers inherited trees on their farm from their parents and grandparents, and I think it's important for farmers to hand their farms in good condition on to the next generation. And I think some of these new programs and schemes offer an opportunity to do that in a way that actually supports other aspects of the farm. So that's really all from me tonight. Jonathan is up next. Jonathan's going to talk about some of the new schemes that are available, and Manus is going to talk about what the process actually looks like. If you sign up for a scheme, what the next couple of steps are until there's trees planted on your land and you're kind of managing a woodlands from then on. So I've asked the lads to stick to around 12-15 minutes, so as we have a good bit of time for questions afterwards. I think these nights are interesting when there's a bit of back and forth rather than just listening to the likes of us speaking. So Jonathan's got 39 slides, which he promises me he's going to get through in 12 minutes, which good luck. Yeah, I'll welcome Jonathan up. So thanks everyone again for coming out, and we'll chat again. Just this button, Jonathan. Oh, sorry, excuse me. There you go now.
Okay, cheers. Thanks, Ray. Good evening, and thank you for the invite here tonight. How do I switch? There it is. So as Ray mentioned, my name is Jonathan Spatsy. I originally started as a forestry contractor some 25 years ago, graduated to consultant forester like Manus. I worked for about 15 years, so a bit more in Clare and surrounding counties. And since 2017, I'm now part of the Teagasc Forest Development Unit. So there's 8 of us around the country. And as Ray mentioned, what we do is we assist farmers and landowners with the sustainable development of their forests for income optimization. Income on farm income is very important, is the first port of call, but also for farm sustainability. And Ray mentioned a few important services the forests provide: water quality protection, biodiversity, recreation. We all seen during COVID how forest recreation became so important and how much usage they got, and ultimately for quality of life and well-being. So there's a lot of important benefits from forests, but we'll start from income. And I suppose in recent months we've seen the launch of the new forestry program, grants and premium schemes. So I'll cover mainly those in 12-15 minutes. So I'd imagine there's a good few farmers here tonight, so I might start with the interaction between forestry grants and existing agricultural schemes, and then I might touch on a few of the newer schemes on offer. A very quick recap of where we are to date in forestry in Ireland. We start from 1% forest cover at the beginning of the 1900s. Today, 11.6% has been an incredibly rapid forest expansion, the fastest or second fastest in Europe. Today, we have 50% of all the forest cover, which is, as I said, 11.6%, is in private hands, most of it on farmers, the rest is public. So a lot of forests are farm forests. We have a strong production industry, timber production based on spruce, a lot of export based, 682 million in 2021, but we see the development of new markets from other species. It's a slower burner, and at the beginning of experimentation, but no doubt that in time we'll match spruce with other species. Big employer in rural areas, and as I mentioned, increasingly important for other services, ecosystem services, biodiversity, water protection, carbon sequestration. Clare, strong forestry county, nearly 2,000 forest owners, 23,000 hectares. What we do in our unit, what I do with landowners, is help with the process of deciding and seeing whether a forest would fit into the farm as part of a whole farm planning. It's a delicate and complex decision, and the one that we don't want to rush, and certainly we emphasize the need for reflection. There's things like grant aid eligibility. You need to start on objectives, what you're trying to achieve, what you want the forest to do, and he has to work within the farm. But ultimately, the actual getting the grant applied it'll be the job of the forester, so we'll hand over to registered foresters, and we might get involved afterward. So it's a kind of complex and delicate process, but for many owners, it's the right choice. There's many elements to the decision to plant, and for some it might not be the right decision, but for some it might just be the perfect decision. But again, it's a complex choice, mainly because it's a permanent land use change. So once you change pastureland to forest, you can't revert it, or it'd be very difficult to do so. So very briefly, just the interaction between agricultural schemes and forestry schemes. The first thing to point is under the current forestry program, there's a two-tier system, farmers and non-farmers. 15 years payment premium for non-farmers, 20 years for farmers. What is a farmer? The definition of a farmer is who has received the BIS this year and either the BIS or the BPS in the previous 4 years. So you have to be received of agricultural subsidies for the 5 years, including this year. Quite straightforward. The base and the CRIS are compatible in many cases, in most cases, with the forestry premium. The premiums are very attractive in terms of so you're stacking your payment. This is a general principle. You always need to check in your specifics with the department before you go ahead. But it's a very attractive payment arrangement. On the other side, area of national constraint, which would be practically the whole of Clare, will not mix with forestry payments. There's great interest in forestry and the organic scheme. I don't know if any of you here is in organics, but if, as of this year, for the first time, you can collect the organic payment and the agroforestry payment. If you're in acres and you think in forestry, you'll have to remove the acres, the parcel that you want to plant from the acres plan. There is, however, an opportunity after 2 years that you are in acres to slot in a forestry scheme, a forestry planting, as sort of an acre measure, if the new commitment is of equal or higher benefits to the environment, which means native woodland. So this is just to give you a sense of how, if you're in farming, if you're getting payments, forestry payments, a forestry premium might affect you. In some cases they don't, in some cases they do. The other thing to say is that the forestry premium are tax-free. So in many cases, if you incorporate a new forest on farm for whatever reason, timber, biodiversity, recreation, your income will go up. Again, it's a permanent land use change, so you have to weigh the increase in the income with the permanent change. Rapidly, through the structure of the new programme, we have 1.3 billion euros up for grabs for farmers and landowners to put new forests on farm. In the main, we have a two-tier system. Again, we have the main forest types, is 12 new forest types, and then we have a entirely new scheme called the Native Tree Area Scheme, which is proving incredibly popular. Most of my work, most of my inquiries now are focusing on the Native Tree Area Scheme. This is technically outside the afforestation programme, is open to farmers and non-farmers alike, so there's no diversification there, which is good news for some. The premium payments are similar to the general afforestation, but are compressed in a 10-year payment, which makes them very attractive. Maximum 2 hectares, I'll cover a little bit more in a minute, and you need a registered forester to be processed. The forestation scheme, instead, as I said, farmers, non-farmers, there'll be 2 different rates of payment, so the same rate of payment for different lengths. And you'll go through a process of application process that will take a number of months. For the Native Tree Area Scheme, we're talking about a number of weeks in most cases, and Manus might be able to tell us a bit more about that. So the Native Tree Area Scheme is a new concept. It's small-scale planting of small native woodland, primarily for landscape and biodiversity, with 2 elements. Native Tree Area 1, so it's 1 hectare located on the farm, and then we have Native Tree Area 2, which is primarily for water protection, so it's a buffer, it's a riparian strip. They will be planted along a stream. You can see them here in the slide, how they might be arranged on a farm. So the important thing is not all land will be eligible for the scheme. So an eligibility check needs to be made, and registered forester can do that. We can do that in Teagasc in our unit. And basically, to be eligible for the scheme, you need to have your fields in that green layer. And I think there's more than 3 million hectares of land eligible in Ireland for the scheme. So you can see there's very generous grants to carry out the work. There's also fairly generous grants to provide for fencing and deer protection. But I suppose the important part for many owners is, together with the development of the woodland on the farm and the services they provide, is a payment of 2,200 euros per hectare per annum for 10 years. So when we talk about income on farm, an opportunity to diversify is certainly of interest. In terms of the Native Forest for Water Protection NTA 2, it's very similar in terms of payments. The premium is slightly higher. However, it comes with a more specific design. As I mentioned, it's just a buffer. It's a 24-meter strip max from the edge of a river, of a stream or a pond. And in essence, it's just 4 rows of trees with a vastly unplanted setback with about 20% planting. The species are, as I mentioned, is native woodland primarily, so is native species only. If the site is of a dry mineral nature, we have oak, birch, Scots pine and other native species. If it's a heavier clay site, alder, birch, oak and other native species. The buzzword, the main important word there be mineral. So the scheme is limited only to mineral sites. So peat sites are eligible for this. Very briefly on the afforestation schemes, we have 12 different forest type planting, very well resourced in terms of grants and premium. This is just an overview of the 12 schemes. You can see there's a lot of different choice from recreation, timber production, agroforestry, and I might touch, I don't have the time to go into detail on any of those, on all of those, sorry, I'll cover just a couple. Just to highlight another point, with the increased payments and increased diversity, we also have a bit of an increased scrutiny in terms of environmental screening, and a few areas have been highlighted in this programme. So there's a greater focus on high nature value farmland, so the planting will be screened against the impact on those areas. Peat soils are restricted, especially more than 30 centimetres. Also there's a greater focus on waders. Wetland birds, curlew, snipe, golden plover, redshank, downlin and lapwings are in decline, so new planting needs to be measured against that. But there is an environmental report grant available, new one, to cover the cost of possible reporting up to €2,050. Very popular forest type 1 and 2, which is sort of the bigger brother of the native tree area. Slight different stocking, more dense planting, but the idea is the same to cover larger area. You can go up to several hectares, tens of hectares. The payment in all is the same, but it's diluted over a 20-year period, so it's €1,103 an hectare for FT1 and a bit more for FT2. This is a development that we facilitated in Moore Park. Chaggas intensive dairy farm is a riparian buffer with another block of native woodland. This was done under the FT2, so forest for water, but it was done last year. So this could be done now on farm for using, for example, NTA1, the native tree area as well. And you can see how potential runoff would be intercepted by the forest strip, the woodland strip there along the stream, and also how they would give connectivity to the existing woodland. So there's water protection, there's biodiversity enhancement, and also there's income in the short term. Emergent woodland, taking scrub, enhancing it with additional tree planting, collecting a grant and a premium. The premium in this case is much smaller than others. People have thought it could be richer, but nonetheless is there for 20 years. Agroforestry, great interest on this, especially from organic farmers. Around an event in Tulla a few months ago, it was great interest, great turnout. You can see the grant there to carry out the work, and there's a premium for 10 years, nearly €1,000, while allowing grazing so farming can continue. The classic design would be sort of an orchard style planting, which only allows small stock, calves, sheep, possibly chicken. From this year, we have also the possibility of planting the trees, which is only 400 plants per hectare, so it's wide space planting. The trees can be arranged in groups, fenced, and this way you can also have a cattle grazing, so it's more flexible. Very new scheme, continuous cover forest, which came about through interaction and consultation between the department and an organisation called Pro Silva, which Manus will be chair of as well. So this is a new idea behind forest management in terms of productive forests, commercial production forests. Instead of harvesting all your trees at the end of a rotation, you will harvest the timber selectively over time. Just to make a simple analogy, the clear-cut system, which is the dominant system for harvesting timber would be similar to the tillage system, if you want. In continuous cover forest, it'd be similar to rearing a herd of cattle for beef. So you'll be harvesting the biological increment over time. Obviously, you will retain trees to much greater age at time, over time, and it needs better soil, more free draining sites. So Inclair would probably be more suited to our East Clare, the East Clare. And there's additional benefit, obviously, in terms of wildlife, water protection, and landscape. So just to wrap up, I don't know, Ray, how am I doing for time? Just 1 minute. So just some example to bring it home in terms of income. 8 hectares over 20 years, 176,000. 12 hectares of commercial forest, that's a native woodland. 5 hectare agroforestry down there, and the very, very popular 1 hectare of native tree area, 22,000 over the 10 years, on top of all the other benefits. So there's certainly great benefits to be had, financial, environmental, and so on. But again, it needs to fit in the old farm planning, and you need to be considered carefully because it is a permanent land use change after all.
My name's Manus Crowley, so I'm a forester, forest consultant, actually based in Kilkenny, but for my sins I travel all across Ireland to do my work, so I spend a lot of time in Clare here. I think I kind of love the place, but so I've been working with Hometree probably for about 3 years, helping them with their developing forestry down there. Tricky part of the world, and I might elaborate on that in a minute. So I just want to talk about the implementation when somebody decides that they want to plant and the processes that are involved from that stage on. So I suppose as a landowner, it's really important. I'm kind of slightly repeating some of the stuff that Jonathan went through, but it's really important to think about what are your objectives. What do you want your land to do? What do you want the forest for? As a forester, I don't really go out and tell people this is what you should be doing. It's better if you think about it yourself and kind of define your own objectives. So I'll just briefly go through it again. So we've the native tree area, which while it is a small scheme, it's only 1 hectare, it is by far the easiest thing to engage with. So as Jonathan said, once you're within that layer, the kind of turquoise layer, as long as you're not on a peat soil, it's pretty much guaranteed that you'll be able to plant your land. It's a much easier process to engage with. It's a very simple application process, and usually within a couple of weeks you're approved. So I'm not really going to talk about that now for the rest of the talk. I'm going to really focus more on the standard FT types, the kind of regular afforestation. So, so if you're interested in biodiversity, you would engage with FT1 or FT2, the native woodland types. Are you interested in hardwoods, commercial hardwoods like sweet chestnut or walnut or pure oak? It'd be FT6, FT7, agroforestry like Jonathan said. So all the various types are there. So just assuming you've decided what you want. When you engage with a forester, I think it's really useful before you get them to come out to your site to explain to them where the site is. And it's amazing what information we can get from using the Forest Service mapping systems that they have. So we use a Forest Service system called IFRS, and with that this is one of the Hometree sites. It's Ilan outside Milltown, Malbay. So I just use this as an example to show you what we can see before we even go out to your site. So we can just open up the area once you've kind of indicated where it is you're interested in planting, and we can just turn on all these layers that can kind of identify, potential issues and not saying problems, but just things that are on the site. So particularly say NPWS designations, so that would be like special areas of conservation or SBAs. There's no planting allowed in any SBAs at all anymore. So unfortunately, if your site is in an SBA, it can't be planted. This circly thing here, that's an archaeology feature. The green highlighted area is peat soil. So it's quite useful before a forester comes to your site. They can see all these things and just be kind of aware of potential things to be looking out for when they get onto the sites. So a forester has come to your site, and the first thing we do as foresters is we assess your site. So looking at the soils is really important. Is it a mineral soil? Is it a peat soil? Is it wet? Is it dry? So every self-respecting forester should be on your site with a spade in their hand. If they don't have a spade, they shouldn't be there. I don't know what they're doing. So you have to take an assessment of your soils and see what's happening. That there in the far left, that's a soil stick that we use. And you can see it's just a metal kind of hooked thing. And we stick it down into the ground and we can take a kind of observe the peat depth. That's quite important because only native woodland, FT1, is allowed to be planted on peat soils that are deeper than 30 centimetres. Anything that's deeper than that, or shallower than that, is allowed the full range of FT types that we were talking about earlier, but anything above 30 centimetres is only allowed for FT1. The elevation of the site is really important. It's quite tricky, particularly here in Clare and West Clare. You have very windy sites, and you know these are things that the Forest Service kind of views a certain way, and you know we have to kind of observe these things. What sites are appropriate? What types of species are appropriate in certain areas? The exposure of the site. It's amazing. You could be in an area that's quite windy, but if the site is east facing or northeast facing and sheltered, then it's much more likely to be able to have a successful approval for a native woodland application. We have to assess what habitats are present on site. Jonathan showed the high nature value layer, so this is a kind of a new layer that we have to deal with. So if a part of the site is like lots of Annex 1 type habitat, it's not eligible for planting at all. So there's a type of land suitability that we need to observe, and these are the things we need to check on the sites. So the application process. The first thing you do as a client is you assign a forester to be your agent. This is all pretty boring now stuff, but we'll go through it anyway. So all applications are made online using the Forest Service IFRS system. So we draw the plots online, and we have to submit like a series of maps and submit the operational details to the Forest Service. The ecological reports that was alluded to earlier, we submit these all night. So everything is done on an online basis. And the final thing that has to be put up is this site notice, as you can see here. So it's kind of like a planning permission notice that's displayed on the roadside, so the public is aware that you're making an application. So your forester does all of this on your behalf and does all these applications processes. Next step, once you've made your application, it enters what's known as the approval process. Now, I'll just stress, this all goes on in the background. I'm not kind of showing you this stuff to make you afraid of engaging with the system. It's just a kind of a passive process that occurs. If there's any kind of queries that arise out of this, these are directed back to your forester, me, or whoever, and we have to deal with these issues. So it's not something that you specifically as a client has to deal with. Now, unless there's some requirement for ecological reports that may have to be done. So when an application is put in, the first thing that happens is it goes to the local Forest Service inspector. So they'll come out to your site, look at the site, assess it, see if they agree with the proposal that's been put in. Then it can get referred to various bodies. So there's the archaeology unit, if you have some archaeological features on your site. Various relevant bodies, so you have National Parks and Wildlife, Clare County Council, Fisheries. All of these people, they can have an input. Now, in fairness, they rarely do. They just, most of the bodies are generally happy enough. MPWS might have some comments if it's important or adjacent to an important habitat. The final step is then it goes to the Forest Service Ecology Unit. So they will send out a Forest Service ecologist to walk the site, particularly in Clare, where a lot of the land is designated as high nature value land. So they'll just come out and do an assessment and just make sure that we're not planting any important habitats. So that's the approval process. So approvals get issued now. This, as Ray might reiterate, it can be quite a slow process. Years ago, in the glory days, it might take 3 months. Now it could take 18 months. I have noticed though with the new program, it is tending to be a little bit quicker. We're still dealing with a lot of legacy files from the older program, but the newer ones are tending to go through a bit faster. So what happens is an approval is issued. I've stuck up just an example there of an approval, and what's attached to it then is various conditions, that we have to follow. Mitigation measures, which would be like stay back from rivers, don't plant this peaty section. There'll be a whole load of stuff in that. But your forester will read that document and be kind of up to speed on what has to be done. So once your approval is issued, whenever you're ready to plant, we apply for what's called financial approval. Just we send in a form, we get this document here on the right hand side, and once you have that, you can start your site. Okay, so when we're in the what's called the planting phase or establishment phase, generally a forester will look after everything on your project. Like 90% of the time, the forester will manage the entire project, and the grant should cover the costs, except if you have a very small site or if you have a site that has a huge amount of fencing relative to the area. But in most cases, if you have a 3 to 4 hectare site, the grant should easily cover the costs of the works. So most forestry sites would be developed from about October all the way to around the start of May, depending on the weather. Now in West Clare it probably rains most of the time, so you could probably plant year round here. But so about early May was when you'd stop. Trees usually come available a lot later than people realise. It's actually about December that most of the trees are ready, particularly oak. So your forester will kind of manage all the contractors on the sites, and that would include doing ground prep. So the grounds are prepared using a track machine, the fencing of the site, planting the trees, purchasing the trees, and basically developing the whole forestry site. So this is just an example of the kind of maps that a forester would prepare to give to the planting crew. So this is where kind of the element of the forest design comes in. So this is a native woodland site that we planted outside Gort. And you can see it's just kind of like a set of instructions. So it allows for group planting on the site. You can see there's kind of a wet area that the forester put in the kind of birch and alder, and then oak are planted in a series of groups around the site, and Scots pine. So there is an element of forest design going into it. After the site is planted, your forester will prepare all the relevant paperwork to be submitted for the grant payment. So that would include a species map, like this one here in the top corner, biodiversity maps. What's really critical for you as a landowner, and the 2 key documents that you need to have to be correct, are your land registry documents and to have a tax clearance cert. So it's absolutely amazing when we're as foresters engaging with this. The amount of land that's not registered correctly in Ireland is unbelievable. I had a site once where the landowner's great-grandfather was still registered as the owner of the land, and it presents quite a challenge. So normally a forester should be quite diligent, and they'll check all these things beforehand just to make sure that your land registry is in place. But it's just something you should think about if you are interested in engaging with it. So when we have submitted all these documents, like the Form 2 to claim the grant, it goes into the Forest Service, and they'll send out their local inspector again, and he will just check to make sure that the site was planted correctly and that the spacing is right, the stocking is in place. So roughly about 3 months after the site is finished planting, all going well, the grant payment will issue to your forester and the premiums will issue to yourselves. As part of the afforestation scheme, the maintenance is associated with the grant as well. So most people would use the forester to maintain their sites, probably 90% of people, but it is an option to you as an owner to maintain your own site. So sites need to be maintained for at least 4 years, or at least they're established. So that involves just cleaning vegetation, replacing dead trees, damaged trees, pruning of oak or the hardwoods. That there is actually planted. You can see the trees sticking up amongst that lovely meadow there of grass. So after the 4 years, we submit paperwork to the Forest Service again in a Form 3, and they'll send out their inspector again just to check that it's properly maintained. So there's a series of checks all along the way. That you could have your site inspected 3 times just to ensure that everything's been done correctly. And Sinead. So thanks very much.